Good morning, everyone. My name is Joyce Lau, and I am your host today for this webinar on delivering student-centered innovation in Australia. This event is co-hosted by Salesforce.org and Times Higher Education. I just want to do a really quick preview that we're going to have 3 parts today. I'm going to start with David Yip from Salesforce.org, who will kick off the seminar with a brief overview of what we're seeing in education right now. We will then dive into some higher education IDC research findings, and we'll have a discussion with Gerald Wong, head of the Asia Pacific Public Sector at research firm IDC, and Stuart Hilliard, CIO of Latrobe University. Finally, we will have some time for a live Q&A. You will see at the bottom of your screen, and I see that you're already chatting, that there is a little box called Q&A. So as we speak, please feel free to put your questions in early, and we will get to them later in the session. So now I'm just going to very quickly hand over to David Yip.
Thank you, Joyce. I'd like to begin first by acknowledging that I'm hosting this webinar from the lands of the Wurundjeri people. I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which you all work from today, and any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating in this webinar as well. And finally, I would also like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. So this webinar is co-hosted by Salesforce.org, and for those who don't know, we are the impact center for Salesforce, and we partner with global customers to solve some of the world's biggest challenges. So we are very excited today to have leaders from our education community here to share the very important work that they're doing, in hopes that you can also take away some learnings that will help each of you. There's one thing in common in higher education right now. It's that the shift to digital is happening at historically very rapid rates. A connected student experience requires a digital-first mindset. It ensures students, staff, faculty, alumni, donors, and all the other stakeholders of the university community can live and interact on the channels they already rely on their daily lives. For example, digital first includes communicating and collaborating virtually across many channels, delivering virtual support and services to students, staff, faculty, and all the other community stakeholders. And we know that the environment is still very dynamic. It may change month to month, semester to semester. Whatever it looks like, it's evident now that universities need a flexible platform that can adapt and scale with their needs quickly. So today, our aim is to bring you the findings and areas for action, such as prioritizing staff upskilling and reskilling, and demonstrating the value of your digital investments. We'll start by saying this: think big, be bold. We think of digital transformation as representing a fundamental shift in the operations, strategy, and value proposition of your organization. It manifests itself in 3 ways: culture, workforce, and technology. For culture, that involves how university leaders work and interact. That means practicing strategic innovation and embracing change. Workforce, that means meeting new workplace and employee expectations, developing new staff roles, skills, and new competencies. For technology, that means enabling a perpetual state of change. That means IT leaders focusing on digital agility and governance and supporting enterprise-wide decision-making. These are big, critical areas, and part of what makes digital imperatives so crucial to higher education today. Evolving with the next normal means optimizing culture, tools, processes to enable your faculty, staff, students, and everyone at your institution to thrive. Let's go a bit deeper now into where universities in Australia are at on this journey. And with that, I'll invite Gerald Wang from IDC to take us through some findings. Over to you, Gerald.
Awesome. Thank you so much, David. Good morning, everyone from Australia, and good afternoon to those of you in New Zealand. We're very nice to see everyone today. Welcome to today's seminar. So my topic for today is to really talk about kickstarting the digital first road to recovery. We do see certain light at the end of the tunnel for many of us when it comes to the pandemic. I mean, moving into an endemic state, as you've seen with many countries in Europe and US and some in APAC. So today, I'll be going and sharing with everyone some of the worldwide trends that we are seeing in the education space that IDC is seeing. And of course, we will provide a lens of some of the best practices. With me today, there's also the CIO of Latrobe University, Stuart, and he will be sharing with you, some of his, leadership viewpoints in terms of how he has dealt with this and how can you emerge more resilient and more digitally ready. All right, next slide, please. Thank you. So I just wanted to start off with this very quick comic. I think in the 1980s, during the presidential elections in the US, Ronald Reagan actually won a landslide, with this single quote, right? He basically asked, citizens themselves, ask yourself, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? Now, I think everyone here, you should just take a step back and ask yourself also, are you better off than you were 2 years, 3 years ago, pre-pandemic, right? In terms of all the digital advancements that we've gone through, all the pains, all the forced, steps forward towards the digital space, has that been a better, landscape for yourself? And I think we all have our own answers when it comes to that. I think one of the challenges that we are seeing within this landscape is that, we are increasingly seeing this whole economy of now today, that everyone wants everything instantaneously now. They want to have everything at their fingertips. How do they bring about better in education space, personalization of digital service journeys? So not just for the students itself, right? It could be your lecturers, your tutors, your administrative staff, your ops staff, your partners within the entire education higher ed ecosystem. And thinking about more importantly in that, all the progress that we have made in the past 2-3 years, how do we ensure that it continues to stick in a post-pandemic world? And I think that's something that we need to keep at the back of our mind as we go through this presentation. All right, next slide, please. I want to put these 3 themes out there. So from our public sector research in IDC, when we're typically talking to the governments, the healthcare organization, and the education institutions across the world, there are 3 S's that are at the back of mind in many of these policy decision makers that we are seeing out there, right? So the first one is really around safety and security, the first S, right? Where, we're talking about, we're seeing, like for last year, we've seen even moving into this year in the ANZ region, this whole focus around physical, mental, psychological wellness, well-being themes are actually becoming a very big thing because there is a digital burnout, whether we like it or not at some point. And, people missing the connections that we have with each other, the experience you get within campus grounds and all that. We are starting to see a little bit of that. And also when you pivot into a digital space, there are certain risks that you need to deal with. We're seeing increasing ransomware attacks that's happening. And how do you deal with that with, the Web3 kinds of initiatives, digital ID or distributed ledger blockchains and all that, right? So what all that means is that how do you establish trust in your digital systems? Because with all that you have progressed in the digital space, if there is no trust, people would just stop using those, advancements that you have done. So that's something that we're definitely seeing a lot of conversations going into. The next piece is really around sustainability. Sorry, I'm still on that slide. So I think sustainability, I think a lot of whether it's the policymakers at the back of the mind, as they're tendering for services, as they're writing papers, funding papers and all that. A lot of it they're thinking more in terms of how do I ensure that it's not just about, how do I go green, right? So for example, the application that I'm building on a certain data center, the energy has to come from a green source. How many percent of that in the first year, in the second year, in the third year? We're starting to see all those being weaved into these tender documents. And I think many people are trying to understand, the hows and the what exactly do they need to have within those pieces. And I think from academic institutions on its own, because we are the leading R&D organizations of the nations in many aspects. It's not just about addressing these issues also, right? It's about we're actually creating new industries, new green jobs, new green skills, right? So what exactly are they? How does digital fit into the picture? I think that's something that we need to really think about very carefully. And the third one is really around socio-economic ecosystems. And I do point this directly to the supply chain inflation that we're seeing across worldwide. And this is going to impact a lot of the cost of our digital investments as we move in the next few years, right? So whether it is the cost of materials, the cost of the chips that is going up, the cost of labor that is actually going up, the lack of skills within these spaces that you're actually exploring into, especially for emerging technologies. This is something that we really need to address. All right, next slide, please. Thank you. So in a paper that was commissioned by Salesforce, and IDC also worked with them, and we did one case study interview too with Stuart from Latrobe University. One of the key stats that we found from UNESCO is that at one point in time, there were 5.4 million students in Australia that were actually affected and displaced by school closures, right, because of the pandemic. And this were not just like short 1 month, 2 month things; they were pretty prolonged, right? And we still are facing, succeeding waves of the COVID variants that's happening, right? And I think we're becoming more resilient. Of course, that pivot to digital has been very painful, especially for those of you who are parents out there. I totally empathize. Trying to work from home and balancing kids with their schools. It's tough, right? Especially the younger kids who don't know how to use the different resources that are being put to them, right? Like different generations have different kinds of tools that they are used to, right? The younger generations are so used in the social media applications and all that, whereas our generation and the generations before us could be more used to a more standard way of doing things. So there are varying ways to go about coping to deal with each of these different, whether it's generations and all that. And I think one thing we wanted to pull out from this whole piece is that you just have to watch out in the next coming few years, in that because of these students that were displaced from school, especially we've seen in the emerging economies in the ASEAN region and all that, whereby, I've spoken to my domestic helper, I've asked her, what happens when your son was displaced from school for 2.5 years? What happens? Does he go back to where he left off from, or was he just promoted to the next level? And apparently they were promoted to the next level in many of the countries that we have, right? Even though they didn't go through the different lessons, the different assessments and all that. So there is going to be a drop in the skill, and how are we going to address that? Right. And I'd like to, just call out Stuart very quickly here in terms of, what do you think this whole impact on, how has the pandemic impacted Latrobe, and how do you think it will change the way you think about to deliver your education services in the future? Stuart, please. Stuart, you're on mute, I think.
Yes, I was
awesome.
trying to use the button that worked earlier and it didn't work. Welcome everyone, and kia ora to the Kiwis. It's so lovely to see all the chat and everyone joining from all around the place. I'm fortunate enough to be joining from Wiradjuri country, where Latrobe is located, because I'm actually on campus today, and it's beautifully sunny, and because Gerald had a jacket on, I put one on. So, just very quickly, very difficult question to summarise, but I think one of the things that Latrobe went through, and we were not, everyone knows higher ed, whether it be in Australia, whether it be in New Zealand, whether it be across the world, very, very heavily impacted by COVID. Also in Australia, the government didn't let us enter into the job protection framework or any JobKeeper or anything like that. So the universities had the opportunity to enter into the Australian Universities Job Protection Framework. And in the end, only 4 universities did that. And we were the only one who took a 10% pay cut across the board. So right through, and our senior exec group took 20%, and that was for a year. And fundamentally, that got voted up because it was the opportunity for the university to reset, replan its strategy, allow it to do its research 2030 strategy, allow for it to do its digital strategy, and really think about what we wanted to do and how we wanted to shape ourselves. So it also saved jobs. That was a fundamental purpose of it, because we had that time to plan in that little bit of extra money. And we went through 2020, a whole period as we pivoted to, I suppose, a hybrid world and a digital world for teaching and learning. We actually went through two rounds of voluntary redundancy, and quite a substantial amount of staff left the university through that. And then 2021 was all about a connected, joined up piece of strategic thinking, where we ran 23 organisational change programs concurrently. So, and that was against a commitment to ramp up digital transformation. And so this challenge of ramping up digital transformation when the university is going through a massive organisational change has been something that it has been a really challenging environment to deal with. But fundamentally, we believe through that connected piece of joined up strategic thinking, we are in the right place to as really reset and go forward. There's been a continued commitment to digital, and we're not one of these universities that have massive capital plans or anything like that. So it's really about how we drive operational efficiency, the student experience. We improve that through the use of the platforms, and develop our strategy to support our researchers and our learners, not only our students, but also our teachers, if you like, or our lecturers and academic community, has been a real focus of how we change and drive that through. And the digital strategy around that, Gerald, has been about looking at our core strategic platforms with moving to more software and more as a service to really be able to help with that experience. I might stop there because I don't want to talk too long. We could go on forever.
It's all good, Stuart. So just for the quick follow up on that, can you share a little bit more around the digital skills gap that you saw? I mean, this whole pivot to digital also requires non-IT folks to get on the digital bandwagon also, and that took some transitioning. How have you guys coped with that?
There's a couple of ways, and one of them is really important from a university perspective. We have actually leveraged a lot of our strategic relationships, and that was interesting. And you saw a slide about dealing with vendors and that. I think the thing that's missing in there is that ability to leverage your vendor partnerships and your strategic relationships and double down on that to really outperform as well. So we've leveraged that, and through our industry engagement and partnerships team, they've developed things like cyber programs that are actually going out to the schools as well, and educating that, but also bringing those industry partnerships into help what we shape as our courses going forward and our offerings going forward. But that's that piece, and also look at short courses and micro credentials. So that's about skilling the nation, I suppose, in the community. But from a real, what we needed to do to really start changing the way we work and really drive those new ways, we were fortunate that before the pandemic hit, we'd started off a couple of major projects. Our Prime project, where we, as one example, and also another one where we're looking at a SaaS-based platform, and we were able to really involve our user base and our academics in that process, and drive an agile mindset, more about adaptability, embracing the principles of agile, and actually bringing those academics in as product owners to help lift that digital dexterity as such. So what was really interesting, I always remember one of the product owners saying they used to go to these meetings with papers and agendas and everything like that, and they were rocking up to these stand-ups and having to make decisions on the spot with very little thing to drive the project forward. So it really started to perpetrate through the organisation, a bit of a cultural change in that way. Gerald.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Stuart. Let's go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So I'm just going to share with everyone the worldwide education trends that IDC. So it's basically our prediction statements. There are actually 10 of them. We didn't have the statements here because formatting issues. But if you want to see the entire webcast and the statements and all that, it's on idc.com. Just go there, search Futurescape Worldwide Education. There is a webcast. Our Worldwide Education lead actually provides a presentation on them. Now, for the predictions that I've taken a look at the top 10 predictions, and what I've done is I've bucketed them into 3 themes that we're seeing for the year in the next 5 years, right? In terms of what we need to focus on. I think the first one, as Stuart very clearly mentioned earlier, is also thinking you really need to reimagine what the future of work is going to be like for institutions, right? So it's not just for the staff itself also, but and also think about what are some of the digital education service ecosystems that you need to put in place for your students, right? For all your so-called lifelong learners now, because it's not just the up and coming students, it's also your existing workforce. We're seeing a lot of pivoting towards micro-credentialing, for example, to find new areas of revenue and all that. So I think this is something that we definitely do see grow within the higher eds for the Australian ANZ region, right? And I think the next theme that we do need to address is really around digital fatigue, and it's real. Mental wellness, learner empowerment, digital peer support communities and all that. I think one of the key things about universities is the experience, right? Because many of us go to universities because we want to soak up in that environment, right? Where you interact with peers, where you are learning, where you are, I love to use these terms, live, learn, work, and play within institutions, where you really, immerse yourself in that. And doing it digitally kind of takes away a little bit of that. I mean, yes, we've heard about companies like Facebook trying to pivot into areas such as metaverse, where they're trying to do a hybrid of physical, digital pieces and all that. But I think there is still something magical, being on campus grounds itself, right? So I think we need to really address this. How do we manage? Help students manage their time better, their work-life balance better? How do we help staff do that too? I think that's something we're definitely seeing a lot of initiatives, funding that's going into that space. The last one is where you're going to see more funds coming in. It's really about the democratization of digital skills, right? It's going beyond the IT department. It's not just about what does it mean for me to be an IT architect, an IT programmer and all that, and what is my next steps, right? It is also folks that are not in digital traditionally. So what does it mean for me to be a digital researcher? What does it mean for me to be a digital HR person, a digital finance person, a digital, comms person, right? There is no clarity on that right now. What are the different tools and how do we go about doing it? I think this whole piece is starting to become a big conversational topics as we speak to many higher ed institutions. Next slide, please. So not to go too much into the details of this whole, the spending investments in IT, but as also Stuart did allude to, we definitely do see a huge exponential growth in terms of IT software spending. For instance, in applications development, deployments, infrastructure, software, in the past last 2 years itself, and it's continuing to grow because I do think that there is a lot of traction, there is a lot of pieces in that. I would just like to reach out to Stuart again to maybe elaborate a little bit more around this in terms of, what do you think some of the top 2 to 3 digital capabilities and technologies that you are planning for your organization, and how are you actually securing, the funding, the resources, the talents, the teams, and the partners within this space?
Gee, I'm going to talk for a while now, Gerald. Great question. And this is a really interesting slide, because part of what we have done with our digital strategy is we've really looked at how we can change some of our legacy infrastructure in terms of the pieces around what everyone traditionally calls your platforms and servers, storage, your compute, all of that, your network, right? So one of the things we've actually done is we've really looked to shift to more as a service and software-defined architecture in that space. And foundation within our digital strategy overall, we've outlined a series of digital principles to support that, so that we've got 6 programs running, and all of them refer back to the digital principles to ensure consistency across that. Similarly, with our data, we've again, in our application space, we've really looked at what we want to do and support with as a service options. So we're investing in these core SaaS-based cloud-native strategic platforms such as Salesforce. And one of the programs that we've designed around Salesforce itself is what we call the Latrobe 360 program, and it builds on our Prime partnership that we've done. And that, it's nothing new in what the universities are trying to do, but it's all about designing that 360 view of the community, your customer, and everything along those lines. Back to me, comes back to where we need to drive into ecosystems so that we, the fundamental to that digital experience platform, and whether it's Salesforce or any of the other SaaS-based platforms like that, it's about that digital experience that you're trying to deliver. And below that, where you deliver into that experience layer, your personalization and contextualization, fundamentally it comes back to your data. You've got to have your data as your engine, and we've certainly gone down that, redesigned all our data models to a canonical data model, so we're getting reused. We've put in an API tool so that we can interact with the ecosystems, bring in public APIs and things like that into the future, and really drive that opportunity for low-code, no-code apps by being able to source data through the API tool and as an example, things like that, which we think will help be able to scale and drive forward in that space. And that is core as part of our cultural qualities and our cultural values. We have an innovation as a cultural value, so we want to be able to bring those behaviors out, as we have with accountable and being connected and things along those lines, but really bring those type of behaviors out. And it was an interesting comment that you made. There's new terminology going around about digital judgment, right? And what organizations need to lift people as a whole to have a digital judgment of why and when and how to use digital. And that's all back to the people and the cultural changes that we're trying to do. And as part of I mentioned our massive transformation we did in 21 with the org change, we're now into that real transition and embed phase, which is really about driving different levels of new ways of working, cultural change, to really start focus on that digital capability uplift across the organization. But fundamentally, as a smaller workforce, we've got to get our guys all around these core platforms and increasing and getting the right skills. So I talk to the team about things like no longer managing the team, you need to be able to sell the service, and we've got to take them on that journey and constantly evolve our operating model to join not only with IT, but to create these hybrid infusion teams where we're working together on platforms and delivering business priorities.
Awesome, thank you so much. Next slide, please. So we'll come to the summary slide for today. We do have 7 key actions in progress, and it's being further elaborated in a white paper that will be shared. I'm sorry to the organizers if we've not announced this, but it will be shared with everyone, after this webinar. I think let me try to do a quick summary on these 7 key actions. I think one of the key things that, some takeaways that Stuart and I have basically seen today is that you really need to realign your digital roadmaps, right? Really need to take stock of what your existing strategies are and review their effectiveness, and really think digital first as a strategic norm as you move forward, right? In a shared, integrated campus kind of approach. And that's where we do see many campuses succeeding in the virtual space. The next one is really to think agile and more bespoke by design, right? So if you are able to scale up and down, in terms of capabilities, if you are able to develop 360 personalized digital journeys for every one of your stakeholders, right? So it's not just your students, your administrators, your partners and all that. So how do you push services down rather than wait for them to pull it from themselves? I think that's where we're starting to see some of the different ways digital can help improve automation within this space, right, to integrate it better. And of course, you need to think about, what are some of the, should you be insourcing stuff? Should you be outsourcing stuff? I think there is always that conversation that is going to take place, in many CIO organizations. Do you want to build internal capabilities, or certain things can you just outsource them and get a quick, outcome out from that? And I think last but not least is really an all hands on board kind of approach when it comes to digital, right? Really collaborating across the silos to create new products, new assets, new services. I think this is something that is very, very critical, for campuses that want to survive in this whole endemic state as we move into the future. With that, Stuart, do you have any further comments at the moment? Or would you like to go into Q&A?
All I would say, and it's inherent in there, but I think to succeed as a university, it is so dependent on the people that you work with, and the collaboration across our community is fantastic. And I think that is fundamentally why Latrobe is making leaps and bounds on its digital transformation. We have fantastic leadership from our executive sponsors, who are our, most of our senior executive group on these programs, and they bring that passion to what we want to achieve and what we want to do. So that's the only thing that I would say as a key action, is make sure that there is alignment right through the organisation to really driving new ways of working, the people alignment as we go forward, because the technology doesn't do it alone.
Awesome stuff, Stuart. Thank you so much. David, could I hand the floor back to you, please?
Sure.
Sorry, Stephanie and Joyce. Sorry.
Thank you so much. That was a fascinating conversation, and we have lots of questions from the audience. I'll just do the first one very quickly. If anyone would like to talk about ANZ more broadly, instead of just on Australian strategies, is there anyone who'd like to pipe in? These seems like quite broad topics you were discussing that might not be Australia specific.
I think it's very interesting for the Australia ANZ region, because many of the universities also do have regional and international presence, right? Like for Stuart's Latrobe, I'm sure you guys are collaborating. I do know that you have a collaboration here in Singapore with SIM, for example. So I think how are you actually enabling those international strategies, especially in this pandemic situation? Maybe I could reach out to Stuart again for that. Sorry.
It's a great question, and I think the themes, and we've done a lot of work through the Council of Australian Universities Director of IT on themes that are really important in terms of a strategic trends in information technology, and they match very clearly with the likes of EduCalls. So everybody across the world is dealing with similar themes, and ours, what we did with the top 10 this year, we themed it into foundations, which were looking at information security and digital integration. Then we themed it into enablers, which was about leadership, modern workplace, which comes into that hybrid way of working, cultural change very strongly in terms of that, and then an outcomes one, and you had student success there, and business business transformation, new models for teaching and learning. So they are consistent with what we've seen broadly across the world. So I think everyone's dealing with the same problem. And when I talk to a lot of our global vendors, they are dealing with the same problem. They might be trying to solve it differently. The other things that universities do really well, and we have, as you mentioned, Gerald, is we've got sister universities and things that they're still in the infancy of building those collaborations and things like that. But those are the things that actually work quite well, as does vendors, global vendors taking you on study tours and things to actually interact and get those interactions and things like that. So I just think, whether I'm talking specific to Australia and New Zealand in terms of the impacts of COVID, the actual what we're trying to achieve in education, and when I talk to people internationally, it's very, very similar.
Yep, it is. It's a huge challenge with, borders closed and all that. But I think there are many ways to pivot away to opportunities to try to get a wider market. Of course, the traditional model still is important at some point, I would say, but there's also increasing competition from the new models that we're seeing out there with the whole MOOCs and all that. And how can you really pivot to compete in that landscape? That would be a very interesting piece. Yep.
Thank you so much. We have a couple questions here about mental health, and I just want to pipe in that I'm zooming in from Hong Kong, where we just heard last night that we're going back online after having been on campus. And in our little WeChat, WhatsApp groups, it's all unhappy face emoticons. This is something that obviously impacts students greatly. We have two questions from Michael Bernard. Can you speak to the potential of digital learning to positively impact student mental health? And do you have any examples? And is there any data on the impact that digital learning has had on student mental health and well-being?
It's a very interesting question and tough one. So we've seen I don't see a very coordinated approach, country by country, jurisdiction by jurisdiction, but there have been some successes in the more, I don't like to use the word advanced, but countries that literally have better access to connectivity to, electronic gadgets and all that. They typically tend to do better from that perspective, in that they are able to connect, they are able to build a more immersive kind of, solution around it, and really engage the student at, their level of comfort in terms of the different social media apps that they're dealing with, and also help them with courses and all that. But I don't proclaim to be an expert in that area, to be very honest. But we've seen some help, and actually a lot of all these mental resources. It is not just on the the students alone. It is also the caregivers and the folks that live with them, and the community that supports them. I think a lot of that is very important as part of helping folks cope with mental fatigue when it comes to being too much online and all that, right? To disconnect, to really think about what are new different areas and all that. I don't have a perfect answer at this point on this, but we are definitely seeing more initiatives. So like like countries like where I'm from in Singapore, where you are actually being issued gadgets where to exercise, to remind you to step out of your computer, to head out there. That there are some things that I do see some health promotion authorities are actually doing and trying to get into in that space. Stuart, would you like to comment?
Yes, I think this is a really interesting question, and when you live in Melbourne, which has the world record for lockdown, I'm sure it still does, and fortunately we're out of it. I never want to go back there, right? But it's been a tough few years, and one of the things that us as Latrobe as a university did, as and it's no different to any other university in this space, but they did really try to prioritize connection for the student. They did nurturing campaigns to reach out and right at the start of the pandemic and check how they were going with online learning, trying to build those communities and those connections for the students and things like that. Some slightly different examples, and we're fortunate again, one of our strategic partners is Medicare, so we're looking at what we can do with Medicare to continue to bolster mental health, not only for our students but for staff, with activities and things like that. But one of the things that's really interesting is the use of AI in this space and the ability to get sentiment analysis, and even during the course of digital learning and online lectures, to be able to get some sentiment analysis from your student community. And I spoke to a lecturer in the States at a conference who was telling me how using some of the Microsoft tooling, they've been able to curate their lectures on the fly based on the sentiment coming through from the students. So I think there is a growing field of digital interactions that can happen through this space.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it comes down into the nuts and bolts of how you deliver the digital service. You know, maybe stop doing the very traditional, you know, fill up this form, scan this document, upload it kind of approach. There are, I think, many universities where we're seeing now is really to explore these whole low code, no code kind of capabilities to build up, you know, software development pieces, right? To really make it very easy for you know, folks that are creating digital content to have, you know, certain functionalities where they can just drag and drop and all that. And I think that's something that, you know, it's really about improving the experience in the digital space, making things more convenient, more ease. The old ways of like the forms and filling up all those kind of stuff, it can get tedious sometimes, right? So I think that's something that we are starting to see a pivot and change on that. Yeah, Joyce, back to you, please.
Sure. Well, that follows up with a quite funny question we have from John Coakley. A typical professor has to deal with 129 different digital applications. That may be a slight exaggeration, but I know the professors I know who have Zoom and they have a slide and they trying to share video. Feels like 129 apps in their everyday life at universities. How can Salesforce help us to cope with what he calls application overload?
Before anyone answers that, I might just say I feel your pain, John, right? And this is part of our digital strategy is actually to rationalize and simplify what we do, and that's why we've taken very much a platform approach. So even a lot of our legacy applications, as part of our ongoing strategy, we're looking at a modernization approach where we might be able to rationalize some of these legacy applications into the Salesforce platform and things like that, and actually explain the use of Salesforce platform. I've been talking to David a lot about, you know, that further advances of the education cloud and what it can do. I might ask David whether he can actually add some comment on this as well.
Yeah, thanks, Stuart. Yeah, so I guess the platform approach and also just juggling all these, I guess the explosion of bespoke apps is a challenge that everyone faces, not just in education, but also other industries as well. And, you know, but the platform approach really lends itself really well because you get familiarized, you know, screens and processes and just the look and feel of how to get things done. And that's one of the, I guess, the end user benefits of that, because you don't have to learn a new thing every time. Become familiar with the environment that you're actually doing and get on with the task and completing the task. But one thing that I might add in this within this current context, when we're actually rethinking how we actually do things, you know, this is a great opportunity to really start to reimagine the processes, right? Because over time, a lot of these solutions, you know, the reason why you might have 129 applications is that, you know, they've just been one after another introduced over many years. But now with the current situation that we're in, we have the opportunity to rethink our, you know, the core outcome. What are we actually trying to achieve? Instead of trying to just figure out how to, you know, work with the current group of apps, maybe consolidate and to replace, but reimagine it from the perspective of the user, be it the faculty, the professor, the student, or the staff, and then use the platform to reimagine and redesign the whole process end to end. And if you do that, I think you'll find, naturally, a lot of these applications will then fall away because you're focusing on the user themselves. I think, Stuart, your Prime program was, I think, a great example of that, because you took a very researcher-centric, clean slate approach. And the outcome of that, was a lot of applications, legacy ones got, retired and consolidated onto the whole platform. Can you sort of share some experience around that?
Certainly, one of the key outcomes about the benefits are almost immediate. So part of the design right from up front was we did a lot of work on the human-centered approach to that with our system integrator partner in Salesforce, in terms of looking at how the researchers needed to, day in the life of a researcher, day in a life of a research administrator, to really understand what services were required to drive forward from that perspective. But what it allowed us to do was create almost like and I don't like using the term, but a one-stop shop on the Salesforce platform doing this, in terms of we managed to coordinate and remove 9 disparate systems within one area of using the Salesforce platform as a platform approach. The benefits are immediate, right? Approvals of research proposal submissions reduced from, a 10-day average down to within hours. Again, the human ethics approval reduced from 11 to 20 days, depending on complexity, right down to, again, 1 or 2 days, and sometimes hours. So, that was absolutely an amazing outcome, but it wouldn't have been possible without the input of our academic community in that design right from the start, and their continual involvement and drive to get that outcome.
Thanks, Stuart. Yep. So could I just add a very quick one on that? So what I've shared earlier is that you really need to realign your digital roadmaps, right? Really take stock of all these different initiatives that you have on hand, and always think in terms of outcomes, right? For those of you here from IT devs, from CIOs, I know your mind is programmed to servers, ports, switches kind of conversations, but the folks that are non-IT that are actually going into digital today, their conversations are different, right? So they say, if I'm going to invest in a new solution, what are the outcomes that am I going to get? Like, is it going to improve my student retention or learning capabilities by 20% and all that? So, and the way they tender for things is very different, right? So you need to really think about how do you speak to that language? And I think that's something that, we're definitely starting to see a lot more CIO officers, IT departments really pivoting to, and really creating that value and really understanding how you deliver that value, which is a key thing. Thank you so much, Joyce.
Thank you so much. I just want a reminder there's so many questions and such vibrant discussion in the Q&A box. We have about a dozen questions, but we really only have 5 minutes left in the Q&A. So I just want to tell everyone that I'm trying to pick the broadest ones. We might not get to every question, but thank you very much for asking so many questions. I'm going to move to one by Mary Ann Dever. I know that Stuart, you just talked about bringing the community into the design. And she has a question about how we can bring student voices and insights into this process. And what are the opportunities of co-creation with students?
It's a great question, and it's something that we step back from and go, how do we drive, and it's not only students, but a voice of the customer outcome into our design. So we have, and there's a couple of different things here. We've had under our DVC students portfolio, we actually have a co-creation student lab where they work with staff and students to get outcomes on certain things. And that's not necessarily around digital projects or anything along those lines, but that's been a really good component of getting co-creation with the students. What we have done through that with a lot of our projects, and particularly things like when we we put in digital assistant capability for our Ask Latrobe students, so chatbot as such. We have gone through our DVC student portfolio and actually asked for student volunteers and rewarded them very simply with things like gift cards, or even if they're heavily involved, we'll pay them as a casual and give them some cash for their involvement. They get involved in testing, get involved in asking questions. Similarly, we're fortunate, I suppose, that we've also had that situation where staff are students, but it's something that we are constantly trying to leverage into our projects, and the next stage of our going to that digital capability and that digital uplift is even bringing our graduates into our workforce on a more regular basis, whether it be through internships and things like that, to really try and increase their involvement in that whole digital transformation program, so that not only are they hearing about the latest tech in their lectures, they actually can come and be part of those projects going forward. And we've been trying to drive something through with our graduate area. We actually get involved in the student projects as well. So I think different universities do it differently, but ultimately I think it comes back to creating almost like a voice of a customer component. I'll talk about, I remember always talking to someone from Amazon who said what they do in their design is they have an empty chair in the room, which they say, that's the customer. What would the customer think, right? When they have some design things. So, you should do that with students. Maybe in our programs, we've got a student system transformation. I might remind them of that and go away and say, have you got that empty chair in your design sessions for multiple projects we've got going on? But yeah, very good point.
Do you think we can squeeze one more question in from Grant Beavers? We'll keep it brief. There's a lot of innovation in APAC. I'm interested to know how assessment practices are innovating given the reduced capacity on campus, and that we may not be able to return to old practices. So this is about assessments.
Oh gosh. It's tough. That's all I would say. I do have many lecturer friends, and reading their Facebook comments on, how do they go about online proctoring, and it's tough. There's some of them basically say it's basically like watching paint dry. So I think there are some ways I think that we can do it more intelligently, potentially through certain analytics on the video itself and all that. I think there are some innovations that are still being developed and all that. But currently, it's also quite invasive. I know it's a very sensitive topic within the ANZ region also, especially when you are getting students to install foreign software on their own personal notebook, having access through an unsecured channel into their homes, getting them to pivot around their homes and all that. So I think there are a lot of things that we need to address from a policy perspective. There are a lot of things that we need to, think about. And I think assessment definitely has to change. We're starting to see from a pedagogical kind of approach is more towards an open kind of assessment, rather than a closed book kind of approach, right? So I think there are some ways that you can go about, I guess, doing that. Stuart, any comments?
It's certainly something that we haven't solved yet. We did investigate some online proctoring solutions, put it on hold. Some of it's the cost is not is very high as well. But going to your point, Gerald, that change by the academic community to the types of marking and grading has been quite. We've pivoted slightly in that space, and we've been able to leverage our LMS to be able to provide different types of marking and those. Again, I think the future in this space is very much around how you look to use potentially AI to really drive a accelerated learning, right? So you're rendering up study guides for people based on what their grades are and their weaknesses are and things along those lines. But yes, definitely there's still a bit of work to do in that assessment piece.
Thank you so much. There is more than we can discuss in this hour. I hope we can continue this conversation moving forward. I know that David has some additional resources that he can present that may move this debate and conversation ahead. David, I will hand back to you.
Great. Thank you, Joyce. And so to a wonderful audience, really appreciate so many questions and some really insightful discussion amongst our panelists. So first of all, thank you to the partnership with Times Higher Education for helping us bring this event to life. To Stuart, to Gerald, really thank you for being our guest on this panelist and sharing your insights across the region, as well as some real life examples deploying it, and also what the university itself in Latrobe you're actually doing, and in real time some of the outcomes that you're seeing. Now on the screen, you see there's actually a number of different assets that we have. There is a IDC research paper that we have on our website. You can click on the link and download and see two case studies, one with Latrobe University and also one with University of Technology in Sydney as well. Two different aspects of undertaking digital transformation and some of the results and insights that they've actually gained along the way. Our education summit, I'd like to draw your attention to the event, which is coming up in April. Please click and register. It is a global forum, not just here in APAC, but also with our counterparts in Europe and in the US. Thought leaders coming together and sharing their past experiences and also vision for the future as well. And last but not least, the Connected Student Report, research that we conducted during the midst of the pandemic. You can see some of the research outcomes. The mental health and well-being is one of the key things that it has highlighted. That is still a lot of work to do, but it's very exciting is some of the innovations and some of the approaches people are taking in tackling that very important issue. And with that, I'd like to say thank you for everyone tuning in today. We hope you've got a lot out of today and hope to see you at our next event.